Hey, welcome back to the Ready State. Hanging out with one of my professional cyclist friends, and we're continuing on our cycling adventure conversation here. But this relates to anyone who does a lot of high-level repetitive motion. So our cyclists, our runners, sometimes when we see high volume in a very specific motor pattern, we tend to see dysfunction, or not even dysfunction, but patterns that represent that sport. So soccer players look like soccer players, cyclists look like cyclists, right? The idea here is oftentimes we just need a little bit of input to get ourselves back to baseline. And ultimately what we want to do is appreciate that, hey, yes, I should be in a complete movement practice and I should do some soft tissue regulation, down regulation at night. But ultimately we are going to have things that we like to do, and figuring out what it is that keeps you in the game, sort of your own specific set of tools to do to make yourself feel better, given that you are a specialist, okay? That's sort of a hypothesis. So this is one of my favorites to unlock and restore motion in this stiff hip. Now, one of my favorite people on the planet wrote this incredible book called Anatomy Trains. And if you haven't read Anatomy Trains, definitely do it. But the idea around Thomas Meyer's thinking is, hey, if we're looking at the connective tissue system, we, in our traditional models, tend to say like hip, femur, trunk. Instead of seeing this as a contiguous fascial system, sometimes it's just interrupted by a little bony stitch or an interface. So when we see stiffness here, not only do we want to look what's happening downstream and here, but we want to look at what's going on upstream above that. And those things sort of are deeply related. Now, one of the things that we hear a lot is that our athletes get a little bit short in the hip on the side. They feel a little bit junky and stiff in here. So I want to give you a couple strategies to improve that. Well, we did this a long time ago, or not so long ago, but a few months ago, called Sparkle Watts. It came from one of our cyclists. And one of the things that we do is both hands in a band. And what's nice about this position is that this allows me to spend some easy time overhead, even though I don't have perfect overhead position. And then I can start to spread out into the hip and kind of capture some of the stiffness in the back, because I'm loading this upper body first, prioritizing that, then I'm moving the lower extremity second. So it's nice that this is my load, and then the lower body becomes the tensioner. And just like when we were in the kind of splits machine, this is a wonderful way to be able to hit some positions, or to just even think what we're doing here. I'm working on overhead position. We call this stacking archetypes, right? Overhead position in a hinge. Now it's overhead position in some kind of aggressive lunge or split shape. But it allows me to get things like side bending in here in ways that sometimes aren't addressed, because it's difficult to get a ton of side bending. In yoga, I put my arms over my head and I try to bend to the left or try to bend to the right. I can pull my hand. But what's nice here is the distraction gives me an opportunity to find corners and positions and make connections in the lower body. So even when I do things like get in this overhead position, I begin to rotate, and some of those rotations you'll see will open up and lengthen some of those connective tissue systems. It's almost like the positions we were trying to do in yoga mattered, right? We're trying to understand what the heck's going on in Warrior 2, et cetera, even triangle pose. You can even begin to understand what the kettlebellistas were doing in some of these positions. But throwing up a band, making sure you can breathe in there, is a simple way of beginning to work on connecting some of these tissues from upstream to the downstream. Part 2, we're going to talk about one of my favorite ways to start to challenge these tissues from a downstream way.